Have you ever wondered who invented law, literature, war, writing, empires, and even civilization itself? The answer to all of these questions lies in the story of an ancient people group known as the Sumerians. For thousands of years, this civilization was forgotten until the 1800s, when the Sumerians were rediscovered and their great achievements were made known to the world. Pretty much everything we have today is thanks to the efforts of the Sumerians. So now, we are going to dive into the history of the founders of civilization, the Sumerians. The history of the rise of civilization begins in ancient Mesopotamia. In prehistoric times, most of mankind were hunter-gatherers. This essentially meant that they would go around in large areas of land in search of food. This could mean that they'd go out in large hunting parties in search of wild animals, or they could go around foraging in forests for fruits and vegetables and berries. And so this way of life dominated almost the entire earth, except in ancient Mesopotamia, where this lifestyle was quickly dying. It was in Mesopotamia where the first farmers realized that they could have a reliable supply of meat, milk, and wool if they herded, farmed, and bred sheep and goats. Undesirable qualities were later bred out of these lambs until we have the domesticated sheep and goat that we have today, and thus farming began. One of the most revolutionary discoveries in these prehistoric times was the domestication of grain. The world as we know it would never be the same if it was not for this singular plant. Interestingly, historians are unsure whether grain was initially grown for beer or for eating bread. But nevertheless, once people found wheat's usefulness as a food source, it was grown in mass. Like sheep, grains were bred to exhibit more useful traits and get rid of negative ones. For example, wild grains originally produced kernels that were not so close together and blew off the plant easily. These traits were disliked by early farmers, as kernels were not maximizing their space and blew off when the farmers tried to harvest the plant. In order to remedy these problems, farmers would find wheats with tighter clusters of kernels and that did not blow away and selectively bred these plants. This same process occurred in almost all the foods we eat today. Some of you guys might be wondering why all of these revolutionary inventions occurred in Mesopotamia. Well, it's mainly because Mesopotamia had a great climate and it was located on the Fertile Crescent, which was areas of land in the ancient world that possessed immensely rich and fertile soil. Not only that, but Mesopotamia was also in the midst of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These rivers held large amounts of silt built up over thousands of years. These two rivers held immense amounts of silt that's been built up over thousands of years. And when these rivers flood, the silt washes on the shore and creates even more fertile soil that is perfect for farming. Because of all of this rich and fertile soil, Mesopotamia was the ideal place for farming and the domestications of sheep and wheat to begin. Due to all of these new innovations, and the fact that Mesopotamia's soil was so rich, settlers soon started pouring in to areas near the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. One of the earliest of these groups was the Ubaidians, forefathers of the Sumerians. They would go on to build one of the first cities ever built, called Eridu. Eridu is widely considered to be one of the oldest cities ever built. And it was even considered a city of great antiquity in ancient times. One famous Babylonian quote perfectly sums up this view. A reed had not come forth. A tree had not been made. All the lands were sea. Then Eridu made. Eridu is definitely, again, one of the oldest cities ever built, as evidence of settlement stretches back to 5400 BC. Little is known about the ancient Ubadians, but their pottery style can be found across pre-Sumerian sites and the earliest layers of Eridu. Taking advantage of Mesopotamia's hospitable climate, Ubadians grew in size, quickly making some of the first population centers and expanding their domains outside of Eridu. One of the most notable cities founded by the Ubadians was Uruk. This city is the first great city and was home to some of humanity's greatest innovations. Additionally, the Ubadians would later go on to found Nineveh, connecting them directly to the biblical Nimrod. According to the Holy Bible, Nimrod founded both Uruk and Nineveh and was also a great hunter. Due to him founding Uruk and Nineveh, this means that Nimrod himself was most likely an Ubadian. Interestingly, the Sumerian king list mentions a man named Imner-Kar to be the founder of Uruk. The Kar in Imner-Kar's name possibly means hunter, and the Imner sounds very similar to the Nimr found in Nimrod's name. Coincidence or not, cities like Uruk, Nineveh, and Eridu were all ruled by figures similar to, if not by, the biblical Nimrod. Each city was ruled by a priest king early in Mesopotamian history. Each city had a patron deity, with Eridu having the water god Enki. And these priest kings would essentially act on behalf of each city's patron deity. Despite holding both religious and secular power, these priest kings' decisions could actually be overturned by a group of delegates who were elected by the people. About this time, a new people group came to replace the Ubadians, called the Sumerians. I've heard that the Sumerians were originally settlers who came on to dominate the region, but I've also heard that they are direct descendants of the Ubadians and a fellow people group in ancient Mesopotamia called the Samarans. The Sumerians were created when these two cultures mixed, according to this theory. Either way, the Sumerians became the dominant people group in Mesopotamia, and brought in a kind of golden age for civilization. Cities like Uruk would come to hold massive populations and be the home of many important advancements. Many refer to this time as the Uruk period, as Uruk was the dominant city-state during this time. As Uruk grew, it became the center of advancement. Potter's wheels appeared to be first crafted in Uruk, along with writing, which is called cuneiform. Ancient Sumerians never understood how these advancements occurred, stating that fish people taught them all these revolutionary inventions found in the Uruk period. Even today, it is quite unknown how people became so advanced while all the other peoples were still foraging for food. With a sudden increase in populations, farmland to support these cities became very valuable, and soon the city-states contested for resources. These squabbles for food led to the first wars, with the earliest recorded war being the Sumer-Elam War. When war occurred, the delegates chose a leader called a Lugal to lead them into battle. As wars became common and longer, these Lugals soon became full-time rulers, beginning the early dynastic period. One of the most famous Lugals you've probably heard of is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. Not much is really known about him, other than the fact that he's featured in the ancient legend called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Uruk lost much of its power during this early dynastic period, but Sumerian culture appeared to flourish during this time. And we actually have a lot of written first-hand accounts of people in the early dynastic period. In one account, a student talks of his long days at ancient Sumerian schools, where he is caned consistently. Trying to earn the teacher's favor, the schoolboy invites the teacher to dinner, where he is subsequently praised by his teacher and possibly made leader of the schoolboys. Another account displays a father who is upset at his lazy son, who refuses to follow his father's trade as a scribe. And another tablet, one could read of a doctor's methods for curing illnesses. And I just think it's very interesting reading all of these different accounts, and it's very relatable, and, I really, enjoy reading all these first-hand accounts of Sumerian people during this time frame. But anyways, back to kind of what we were talking about. Right now, as populations were increasing, wars became even more consistent, as these Lugals and all these city-states fought for power and for food and wheat and farming land. During this time, two city-states really vied for supremacy at this point, and that was Uruk and Kish. But eventually, the dominant city-state would become Lagash, which was ruled by Enatum. Lagash had been rivals with another city-state called Umma, and waged war against each other several times. Eventually, under Enatum, Umma was finally vanquished, and Enatum placed one of the first diplomatic treaties on Umma, which harshly stated that Umma should never exceed its boundaries again, and had to pay several fines. Despite this victory, which launched Lagash onto the world stage, many people suffered under their oppressive leaders, and had to pay loads of taxes. Under Enatum's successor, Uruk-agina, the trend of increasing government encroachments was reversed. Uruk-inga was the first king to recognize the fact that government is supposed to serve the people, and not the other way around. So he introduced reforms and brought a short time of prosperity, until the rise of Lagash's old enemy, Umma. Angered by Lagash's harsh terms against Umma after the latest Lagash-Umma war, Lugalzagazi, king of Umma, gathered forces against Lagash. Lugalzagazi was victorious, and Umma was a city of prominence in ancient Mesopotamia. Just like Lagash's short era of dominance, Lugalzagazi's ascension to the world stage was short-lived. Not long after Lugalzagazi reached the height of his success, the people of Akkad challenged the new ruler for supremacy of Mesopotamia, led by the great Sargon of Akkad. Sargon grew up in great obscurity. He lived in the first year of his life as a farmer who held no noble blood inside of his veins. As he grew up, Sargon rose through the ranks to become cupbearer to the king. Somehow, this motivated cupbearer became king of Agade, the capital of the Akkadians. At Sargon's rise to power, this new ruler challenged the dominance of Lugalzagazi. In a lightning campaign, Sargon laid waste to Uruk, destroyed its wall, fought with the men of Uruk, conquered them, fought with Lugalzagazi, the king of Uruk, took him prison, and brought him in a neck stalk to Nippur. After Sargon's glorious victory, he marched across Sumeria, conquering everything in his path. Eventually, almost all of Mesopotamia fell under Sargon's armies, forming the First Empire. Sargon went on to conquer much of the Middle East. Now Agade was a center of civilization. When Sargon ate, 5,400 men stood guard, thus forming the First Standing Army. The purpose of all these standing armies and conquests was ultimately for trade, and riches given to Sargon from across his domains made its way through his rich capital, and his empire soon became quite prosperous. These conquests also brought stability to Sumeria, as city-states were no longer fighting ceaseless wars. Despite this, the Sumerians still hated their foreign overlord and waited for an opportunity to rebel. Their time came upon the death of Sargon and the ascension of Rimush, Sargon's son. Rimush spent much of his reign violently oppressing these rebels. I did some light, rounded math on Wikipedia, so this information may not be very accurate, but it appears that Rimush might have been killed close to 100,000 people as he tried to squash these incessant rebellions in Sumeria and elsewhere. This brutal king was eventually assassinated by his servants. According to ancient texts, Rimush was killed by tablets, suggesting that he was physically killed by the pens used to write on tablets, or he was killed metaphorically through the unfavorable writings on tablets. After Rimush's death, his brother, Manishtush, I can't pronounce his name, sorry, succeeded Rimush on the Akkadian throne, and had to contend with another wave of rebellions. Despite this, Manishtush, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name, did not carry this brutal legacy of his predecessor, and it seems he was more of a trade-oriented ruler. Either way, Manishtushu was also assassinated, leaving the kingship to his son, Naram-Sin. This ruler revived the steadily declining Akkadian Empire, and brought it back to its former greatness. Many disliked Naram-Sin, though, as he claimed to be a god, stating in a royal inscription, "The divine Naram-Sin, the mighty god of Akkad, king of the four quarters." This deification was viewed as a great sacrilege, and despite his great conquest, many despised him. After Naram-Sin's death, the Akkadian Empire soon began to collapse. Rebellions dominated the reign of Naram-Sin's successors, and a new people called the Gutians ravaged Akkadian lands. Assassinations on the king was commonplace, and random people soon began ruling Agade. The Sumerian king list even states who was not king, as they tried to describe the political instability that helped bring the Akkadian Empire to an end. Later sources blamed Akkad's fall on the sacrilege committed by Naram-Sin when he claimed to be a god. The gods, specifically the Sumerian god Enlil, exacted vengeance on Akkad, according to the ancient poem The Curse of Agade, for Naram-Sin's great evils. Ultimately, the Gutians destroyed Agade, and Sargon's empire finally disappeared. Agade soon collapsed, and to this day we still do not know where the capital of the First Empire is. The Gutians replaced Akkad as the rulers of Sumeria, but these people were eventually forced out of the lands of Sumeria thanks to the efforts of Utu-Hegal of Uruk. Finally, Sumeria was independent from foreign rulers. Not long after this great victory, Utu-Hegal died in a canal accident, and his son-in-law Ur-Nammu took the throne. By this time, all of Sumeria was united under Ur-Nammu's rule, forming the Neo-Sumerian Empire. During Ur-Nammu's rule, the first written law codes were introduced, and Sumerian culture flourished. These rulers wanted to preserve Sumerian identity, so art and epic poems like the Epic of Gilgamesh were created to shed light on Sumeria's past culture. This time frame was the height of Sumeria's advancement, and the prosperity continued through the reigns of Ur-Nammu and his successor Shulgi. This did not mean Sumeria was free from problems. immigrants called Amorites started coming in mass to Sumerian lands. Shogi tried to stop this crisis by building the world's first known border wall, but even this could not stop the Amorites. Every time the Amorites came to a city, they would rebel and attack the Sumerians. After Shogi's death, weak kings followed, and the Amorites soon devastated Sumerian lands, until the Neo-Sumerian Empire eventually collapsed. Not long after, the Sumerian people disappeared from the annals of history. Despite this end, Sumeria and their ancestors, the Ubaidians, left behind an important legacy that changed the world forever. These people started some of the first cities and towns, writing, laws, war, empires, literature, standing armies, and civilization to the entire world. And so yeah, that is all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to leave any questions in the comments section below, as well as any cool facts or corrections to this video. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless you.
Ki anta bada surah